watching Veracity Hill. Here is your host, Dr. J.
Well, a good day to you, and thanks for joining us here for another episode of Veracity Hill, where we are striving for truth on the historical Halloween. What is Halloween all about? What are the historical origins? What should Christians think about Halloween? That's the topic for today's program. It is quite timely, as in just 2 days there will be little humans ringing your doorbell, dressed up in various costumes, some of them funny, some of them immensely scary, some of them inappropriate, and they're going to ask you, can I have candy? Or, we'll say trick or treat. Now, many of us know what the treat is. What is the trick? I don't even know. But my guest today, I hope, knows some of the answers. He's got a small little series on this as part of his broader podcast and Apologetics organizational ministry, Come Reason Ministries. My guest on today's program is my friend Lenny Esposito. Lenny, thanks for joining us on the program today. Oh, I've lost audio for you, Lenny.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
There we go.
Glad to be here. Glad to talk about all of this stuff. There's a lot of confusion out there these days about Halloween, and it's actually a fascinating holiday and how it's evolved. But I'm glad that we can look at it specifically from a Christian perspective.
Yes. Now, before we hop into it, let me ask you about Come Reason Ministries. I mean, I know you were one of the early pioneers of doing apologetics online. It's been a love for you and for me as sort of our focus. Some folks, they do, their apologetics ministries are geared toward particular audiences, local or abroad, church speaking circuit thing. We know folks where that's the case. Some of us put an emphasis on doing it online, and you were one of the early adopters. Tell me a little bit about your history with apologetics and the web.
1996, 28 years ago, back in what I call the gray page days of Netscape 2.0, where this is before animated GIFs came out, or they were just coming out with them. I literally wanted to do an online the web was new, right? The World Wide Web was just bustling up. This is CompuServe or Netscape days, as I said. And I wanted to write a website, right? I wanted to figure this thing out, but I also wanted to do it in something that was serious. So all I did was I said, well, I need content. How am I going to do this? And I had to go on a BBS system, a bulletin board system, in order to find a chat between an atheist and a Christian. So you had this local dial-up. You put in your 5 1/4-inch floppy drive disk, right?
Yeah.
And you dial up to the local exchange. And I found this is all text-based. This exchange, and I grabbed the atheists' objections and I answered them one by one, called it Answering an Atheist. And that's how the website started. Then somebody else would write in another question and I'd write back on that, and went back and forth, and it grew from there. So that's exactly how God kind of pulled me into apologetics, and I've been excited about it ever since.
Wonderful. Superb. And what got you interested in exploring the topic for today's program on Halloween? Was it just sort of the similar thing that a lot of people have these myths and misconceptions, and you wanted to look into it?
There was a lot of confusion going on. I was, of course, at the time when I first started saying, hey, I got kids and I enjoyed Halloween as a child, but what should we ban it? What do we do? So you got to start looking into it. You got to start understanding what's going on there. And that's basically my focus. And then as I started reading more about it, then I say, you know what, this is something that the church needs to understand, because first of all, it's counterintuitive. By its very name, you're saying, hey, there's something here, because what does Halloween mean? It means All Hallows Eve, right? We have Christmas Eve and we have Hallowed Eve. Why is this a holy evening? Because it was the evening before All Saints Day and All Souls Day. So there was a idea that there's a label here that this is actually a Christian holiday. So did it get perverted, or was it something that the Christians then came in and changed? What's going on with this whole thing? But it threw up those kinds of red flags to say, again, we don't know as much about this as we think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, you mentioned you enjoyed Halloween as, when you were younger. My favorite costume, I think, was when I dressed up as the White Ranger from Power Rangers in the 90s. So that'll tell you a little bit about what decade I grew up in. And that was like the first Power Rangers. Now there are like a gajillion different
Oh yeah.
variations.
Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah. David Jason Frank. Yeah.
that's right.
That's yeah. So as a kid, one of the things I remember doing, we didn't quite have, it wasn't as big a marketing thing. They had, of course, the plastic mask, right? The preformed mask.
Yep.
So I was Batman when I remember that. But one of the things I liked doing was I grabbed a big, extra large t-shirt, not t-shirt. It was a button down 3/4 shirt. Right. And I took a pair of my old football pads that I had gotten as a kid, and I shoved newspaper here, put the football, and I went out as a headless horseman.
Ah, nice.
So basically I created my costume that way. That was how I did that. But yeah.
That's creative. Yep. My kid's already talking about what they've already got it all set. We got 2 days until Halloween, so they're already set on their costumes.
Okay.
And so a lot of kids, they have fun doing it. But then otherwise, there are some parents that are like, hey, this is paganism, where if you go trick-or-treating, you're doing the devil's work, and you're letting, demons into your soul or something like that. I mean,
yeah. So here's an interesting thing, but if you look around, every church you see seems to have a fall festival, a harvest festival.
Right. Yep.
I don't see that many farmers, but it's not the farmers that are celebrating the harvest festival, but it's all the churches. And so it's become kind of ecclesiastically allowed to have a Halloween type celebration because it's
trunk
the
or
end
treats.
of the harvest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but just not call it that, just not label it that. And I joke, it's kind of like the word partake, right? You never use the word partake except in communion. You never say dinner's ready, let's partake. Nobody says that.
Yeah.
But Halloween, it's the same thing. You can't. It's got to be a harvest festival. So let's unpack this. Let's find out actually what happened. The idea of Halloween, everybody points back to the Druids, the Celts, and the idea of Samhain, right?
Okay.
Samhain is the initial kind of understanding of where Halloween came from, and Samhain is it's Samhain. It's a Gaelic word.
Okay.
But basically all it means is summer's end, the end of summer. The Celts had two major views that they said, two major points in where they shifted their years. One was at the end of summer, the beginning of fall, winter, days are getting shorter. Much like many other cultures. The other was at the beginning of summer. So those were the 2 points, the beginning of spring. So we just went through, matter of fact, Rosh Hashanah, right? The Jewish holiday. Why does the new year start in September? For the same reason that many of these agrarian cultures recognize that obviously the crops are in, the trees are losing their leaves, everything's turning towards dormancy, the days are getting shorter, and then again. So there's a natural cycle.
Mm-hmm.
The Celts saw this, they understood this, and they named it Samhain, summer's end. That's all that means. It didn't really have any specific attachment to any deities. It wasn't a festival to worship God X or anything like that. It was simply the marking on the calendar that it was the end of summer. But at the same time, a lot of these early primitive cultures and non-Christian cultures would also believe, and this belief carried through to even medieval Christendom, that during this time there was a thinning of the veil between the material world and the immaterial world. Mm. So the idea is that like spirits and the dead relatives perhaps who have passed on, who haven't found their final resting place, they're more accessible during this time of year because everything's switching towards the dead time of year. Mm. And so some people would, if you think about the Egyptian burial rituals when they would mummify people and they'd put all this other stuff in the coffins to help them on their travels, or you put the coin on the eyes of a dead Greek person so they could pay the toll for the river Styx, that kind of idea. That's the same idea that these Celts had, these
the Druids.
Northerners. Yeah. The Druids were the priestly class of the Celts is who they were. So that was the idea that they had. So they would bake cakes and things like that. And maybe they would have them available for folks then. Then the church comes. Now we get to the church age. And, when you talk about the church, Christianity, you're talking about Christianity in Rome, right? It's Constantine, and you have a Roman Christendom. And when they talk about, say, the barbarians at the gates, the Celts were those barbarians. Mm. So when they start trying to reach out to them, Pope Gregory the Great, who had a very passionate heart to try and reach the English and people on the British Isles, he really wanted to be a missionary there. He was prevented from doing so before he was made Pope, but he wanted to do so. He started looking around and started saying, you know what? We have a holiday where we recognize our dead, the martyrs. The Christian church recognizes the martyrs. We've been doing this since Hebrews chapter 11. Remember the hall of faith and the people who came before you. And it was usually May 13th, 14th, somewhere in there. And he said, all of these people are talking about the dead in October. Why don't we move All Saints Day and All Souls Day to November 1st and 2nd? So they used the Roman calendar. November 1st and 2nd became All Saints and All Souls. And it was fairly close. It wasn't the exact day that Samhain was celebrated. They didn't. But it was close enough to where they say, if their people's minds are on this kind of idea, then we'll make this All Saints Day and All Souls Day. Now, that was considered a holy day of obligation. In other words, it's something that you were supposed to attend church for. First, it was the martyrs, but then it was all the saints who passed on. And then it became, what about all the souls of the people of the regular class, and maybe the saints could help pray for the souls who are stuck in purgatory. That was the thought process. So that's why they're all coupled together. So in medieval Christendom, you have All Saints and All Souls Day. Well, what happened was people would knock on your doors ahead of time. They would take turnips in England. They would hollow out the turnips and put a candle in the middle of it. And this was their lantern to go from house to house. But at the same time, it was trying to remind you that your loved one is jailed in purgatory. Hey, and if you give me one of your little soul cakes that you baked for the holiday, then I'll say a prayer for your loved one to help get him out of purgatory. See how that works? So this was the kind of the initial beginnings. Now, what's fascinating is it did that until the Protestant Reformation. And when the Protestant Reformation comes, everybody rebels against this because it's all about purgatory.
Yeah.
Luther nails up his 95 Theses on October 31st, on the eve of All Saints Day, for two reasons. First of all, everybody's going to be there, right? Holy day of obligation. But also, this is where the indulgences were being executed, was for it to get you out. In the box, a coin rings, and out of purgatory a soul will spring, that kind of thing.
Yep.
So Protestantism really kind of pushed away against that. And you have that kind of in the background. The Irish and other folks continue on because they're Catholic. And the Protestants didn't see Halloween as pagan at all. What they did was they saw it as Catholic. And that's why they were against it. But then something else happens in England that's fascinating is King James of the King James Bible was a Protestant. And of course, at this time, you had a whole lot of wars going on between the Protestants and the Catholics, right? Mary Queen of Scots tries to take over. She takes over for a little bit, gets kicked back out. James is installed. And you had a bunch of Catholic, anarchists who purchase a room next to Parliament, and they bring in 36 barrels of gunpowder, and they're going to light the whole thing to blow up King James and blow up the Parliament so they can install a Catholic government. Well, King James finds out about this, grabs the fuse that's being lit by a man named Guy Fawkes.
Yep.
And puts him in jail. And they decide to make a show of this because the English are always these sporting guys. And they build this big old bonfire. They put an effigy of the Pope at the very top of it, and they set the whole thing ablaze. And they say, we're going to do this every year. This is so much fun. that we're going to keep remembering Guy Fawkes Day. So Guy Fawkes Day becomes a tradition, and the idea of putting on masks so that you can kind of run amok and push people around, or there's also an idea of reversal where the landowners become the servants and the servants get treated nicely. So servants start to knock on doors for landowners and say, hey, hey, do you have anything you want to give me? So you get this Guy Fawkes thing that happens and really kind of solidifies in the British mindset that carries through even onto the 1800s. Then you get this great potato famine, and the Irish come over to the US, right? And they like their Guy Fawkes celebration, and they've got a little bit of the All Saints and the All Souls Day in it. And they remember this stuff and they start doing these things. Well, one of the things that happens in America is you get a third strain. The store owners, the marketers, the commercialist guys, they start noticing, wow, look at that. All of our masks are selling out October of every year. Maybe we can promote this and make it into something.
Yeah, make more money.
And so they start promoting this idea of go out, get your mask for Halloween, right? For All Hallows Eve, get it going. And kids start to say, hey, this is a day where we can kind of get away with it. We can be rabble rousers. And so it doesn't actually start until, say, the 1930s. Halloween's actually in the way we understand it, it's actually a very new holiday. So in the 1930s and the 40s, the kids starts coming in and say, look, if you give us something nice, some candy or something, we won't put your outhouse on top of the barn, or something like that. And so people start, okay, well, it's a kid. Yeah, we'll give him some candy. And that is really where you start to see the origins of the modern Halloween celebration. Then it's off and running through the 70s. It becomes bigger and bigger. And then, of course, what happens is Hollywood gets a hold of it.
Yeah.
So now you have the Charlie Brown Halloween special. You start to see everything in movies. And what happens there is the idea of Halloween now gets transported globally because people in other countries start to say, oh, look at this. This looks like fun. Matter of fact, I had a friend who moved over here in 1984, I think. No, 1986. He moved over. He was living here going to school with me, but he was from Hobart, Tasmania, which is the island off of Australia. And I said, what are you excited about for America? He goes, I'm excited to see Halloween because we don't have anything like that in Australia. But he'd seen all the television shows, right? And he just thought it would be great fun. And so now what you have is you have a tradition that was a child's way of getting, a little extortion attempt actually, but it was a children's exercise to give the kids candy and let them to dress up, that has become the second most profitable holiday other than Christmas in the entire calendar year for retail stores. And adult Halloween parties and all of that stuff have become a tour de force.
Right.
So that's a real thumbnail account of how we got from Samhain, from simply marking the end of summer, all the way to the modern Halloween. And you can see there's various different avenues and routes that bring in from a whole lot of different places.
Right.
But none of them are distinctly occultic. The only thing that's tied Halloween to the occult, there's only two groups who have done it. The first were the Wiccans, who were starting to come up in the 70s and the 80s, and they said, this is a very spiritual holiday. I feel very connected to nature. I can go out and do my Wiccan things on October 31st, and it's just a good time to do it. The second were the Evangelical Christians, who said this is of the devil, not realizing that Halloween is actually a Christian holiday that has been, usurped and things like that. So, and again, all of that talk really doesn't show up until between the mid to the late 20th century, not that long ago. But that's where the occult side, and then when you start getting into that, I think the monster movies of Universal started influencing the costumes and bats and things like that. And so because it was, the Veil of the Dead, and you have that, of course, especially in the southern states, you have the Dia de los Muertos, right? The Day of the Dead.
Right.
And how that's interpreted is with skulls and decorations like that. So So in the U.S., again, your psyche is starting to say, oh, this is part of the dead stuff. So we do tombstones. So we do anything that's scary.
Yeah,
And that starts-
vampires, monsters.
Right. That's all the universal movie style that kids want to. And so it all gets thrown into the mix. And all of a sudden, Halloween becomes this macabre holiday. And that's kind of how it all happened.
Wow. I feel like I just got the whole history here in whatever it's been, 20 minutes. Let me ask. So with the occult, so you said 70s and 80s, you see the Wiccans starting to join in on the existing quote unquote fun.
Well, they would do so earlier, but they simply just weren't that big of a presence,
right?
So but even then, it's not like they marked this day out specifically. Matter of fact, I've got a letter here from one lady. Let me see if I can find it. Now, there are, one of the difficult things about Samhain is that the Celtic culture was pre-literate. There's not a lot written down. So we really don't know a whole lot about how their liturgical year would work. We do know that there's some poetry and some like epics that, have lasted from memory. But most that we know about the Druids and the Celts were written down by their enemies. So either the Romans, who would say that, first of all, they believed that there was a lot of power in the heads of people, so they would decapitate their enemies and save their heads, and they could dismember people. But that's, the Assyrians did that, the Babylonians did that. That's not necessarily anything that's specific to just them. But there are people who say, well, I'm thinking about going out, on Halloween, but this year we're not really planning on doing that. We're going to do something a couple weeks beforehand. So you do have Wiccans who don't necessarily say this has to be the day. Mm-hmm. So even there was a little bit of flexibility in all of this.
So I'm just curious because I know, I'm thinking Salem witch trials, in New England. So even though there's the presence of witches, or people, thought there were witches, there wasn't this association between the Wiccans or even the believed to be Wiccans and Halloween yet, right? There was no attachment there.
No. So again, it's the Christians, and in medieval Europe, the idea of the supernatural has a lot of stock in that period. This is why because you look at the Salem witch trials, you're talking about 16 to 18 women, I think 18 women. If you look in Europe during the same time, or from 100 years prior, the amount of people that they accused and burned on the stakes of witchcraft was in the thousands. I mean, it was significantly higher. But part of this was the medieval mindset that understood, as Charles Taylor says, this was an enchanted world.
Right. And
people in that era thought that, there are entities larger than us that are responsible for some of the things that we see. So they would believe in the English word, they would use fairies as spiritual beings. Those, we may say demons or something like that. They would believe that there are malevolent spirits as well as personal. And then when you add the Catholic teachings of souls and being able to exist in an intermediate state between heaven and hell, some people believe, your loved ones could be wandering the earth because they haven't found their rest. That's why they would say rest in peace, right? So the idea of this in-between time is associated with the transfer between summer and winter. You have what they call the night of the thin veil. It's believed that the veil between the worlds is the thinnest, and it's easier to communicate with those who've passed on. So it's also known as Ancestor Night, Feast of the Dead. Some pagans would put a lit candle in the window to help their ancestors find their way home on this night. And an extra place is set at the dinner table, an invitation for the people to come invite them for a Samhain dinner.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. So you're inviting a ghost to dinner.
Yeah. Well, but they would try to do, okay, well, we don't want malevolent spirits. So what we would do, they would do the bonfire thing themselves. So even the pagans would set bonfires out in front of their house, figuring that would scare the malevolent experience away. Once Guy Fawkes starts the bonfire, this fit like hand in glove. Say, okay, we can do the same thing both ways. And that's well, so yeah. But even Gretchen Passantino had noted that, the belief was that spirits of those who died during the previous year could not go to their final resting place until they were properly prepared with possessions, wealth, food, and drink. Right? Just like I said with the Egyptians and things like that.
Yep.
Until then, their spirits wandered where they had lived and died. And in the medieval mind, this simply made sense. Of course, spirits would warm that just makes sense to us because we believe in spirits. We believe that there's more to life than that. So even within Christendom, they don't give these kinds of things up. They hold on to certain wrong teachings as they continue on.
Yeah. So I guess when I think about the evangelical Christians, is it that we as a people, as a class of people in society, we supplied this idea that it's demonic? Because it's not the occult. So when is it that we think that this is?
It's linked to the dead, and we start talking about spirits of the dead. And I can imagine that what happens is you start to push back on that. First of all, like I said, the Puritans, the Protestants, they wanted nothing to do with Halloween. Of course, they wanted nothing to do with Christmas either.
Yeah.
They just felt that was worldly, that was showy. That was something that didn't make sense. And just as the Christmas holiday has been usurped and broadened by the secular culture, so Halloween has been usurped and broadened by the secular culture. But the idea that I think as our theology got more sophisticated and we came out of the medieval into the modern era, we kind of dismiss this idea of souls wandering the earth. We start reading things like The Thief on the Cross, today you will be with me in paradise. And to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So we push back against the idea that there's this intermediate state. Mm-hmm. We also push back on the idea that there's this purgatory or limbo.
Right. Yeah.
So and those are different. But we push back on both of those as well. And then the idea of just being kind of entranced by the macabre and by death and things like that. So I think that's where it starts to get its footings. And then as the secular world draws more and more into it, the religious world pushes back more and more. Now it gets the label, it's all occult. It's a pagan holiday. And there's no real justification for saying that it's a pagan holiday. It's just part of what the focus is. It's funny how our culture, and this shouldn't surprise me, but it kind of did. It's funny how our culture can better understand evil and sin than it can understand holiness. Have you ever thought about that? So, for example, you've seen Walt Disney's Fantasia, right?
Oh yeah, when I was a kid, for sure.
Yeah, and there's a wonderful contrast that they put in that scene. The first is the whole series from The Night on Bald Mountain is the classical piece, and you have this Balrog come up out of the mountain. It's the famous scene in Disney, and all the ghosts and goblins are swirling around that. You remember that?
Yep.
So vivid, so easily portrayed. And then they want to juxtapose it with the holy. And what do they choose? They choose Ave Maria as the song. But what's the visual? It's like this blurry, out of focus, distant procession of hooded individuals just carrying candles, single line in the distance. It's like, we can't draw holy. We can draw evil all day long. And I think that's part of what people react to is it's easy. We're sinners, right? We're living in a fallen world with fallen nature. It's easy for us to identify evil. It's hard for us to say, here's what a picture of holiness looks like. The only thing I can think of is you draw a picture of Jesus, and that's about the closest you can get to keeping right on track.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I like that. I had a thought, although I've forgotten it now. On last week's or week before last week's episode on paganism, the rise of paganism with Anthony Costello, I'm thinking here, we're seeing this new neo-paganism, this sort of, you might even say a revival of sorts of, this interesting movement toward the occult, toward folk religion. And so, you might see an attempt by these folks to commandeer Halloween as their own, right? So on the one side, you've got the evangelical Christians, or Protestants, critiquing Halloween, and now the occults are saying, yeah, that's right, it is our holiday. It is
right. well, because all of that really in our society today, most occultic practices are simply Christian heresies. So Anthony LaVey and the Church of Satan, how do they, if you strip them of all Christian references, they'd have nothing left. Right? The Church of who? Where'd you get the Satan from? You got it from the Bible. What's this upside down cross? It comes,
Yeah, exactly.
So most folks in that camp, and then the Wiccans are, one step down from that. They seem to point to ancient practices, but they don't actually practice the Wicca of the Druids. Okay, they practice the Wicca the way we practice, the Hinduism of America. It's all neatly packaged through a 21st century lens.
Yeah.
And so, it's the Christian. They say they don't know anything more about the origins of Halloween than anyone else. So they're okay. I'll buy that. If that's our holiday, we'll take it.
Right.
That's how they do it.
It's like a nominal. The equivalent would be like a nominal Christian, someone who doesn't believe it, but just goes through the motions. Maybe it sounds nice. It's nice to raise kids in this, social club. There might be people who approach the Wiccan religion in that way. It's not that they actually believe it, but it seems nice. So let's go through the motions. And
now, and there are true believers. Don't get me wrong.
Oh,
there are those who go deeper and deeper into it. Like I said, I don't know how faithful they are to research the early practices, partially because it's really difficult. Like I said, they're a pre-literate society. There's a lot we don't know about how they practice. But it does highlight the idea that there is no such thing as a non-religious person. Everybody has, even the most ardent atheist, has some kind of faith system to which they adhere. The question is, what is it that they're placing their faith in? And you can tell what they value by where they spend their time and their focus.
Yeah. So let me ask you, as you were researching this subject of Halloween, how much did you go in sort of knowing some of these things already, and what was the most surprising to you? Like, what was the most
I didn't know
thing?
Most of it. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to find out how little the early Celts emphasized this point. And I've just thought that it's fascinating to see all the different points of view that, it's almost like a recipe that you're making like a protein drink, right? A little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of the other, and you blend it all together, and out pops this holiday that we're also concerned about. In Acts 15, the early church struggled with the Gentile question.
Yep.
They were like, what do we do with these guys? Do they need to be baptized? Do they need to be Jewish? Do they need to be circumcised? How do we, what should be the guardrails that we tell them as faithful adherents to Jesus? And of course, the faithful pronouncement from James, right? Here's what you have to worry about. Abstain from things contaminated by idols, from fornication, from things strangled, and from blood. That was it. Those were the four parameters to which you have to worry about. And even that gets kind of modified in 1 Corinthians, where Paul says, he first tells you in Romans, hey, idols are nothing. They have no power. And he even says you can eat anything you want in 1 Corinthians 10, because the only place you're going to be able to buy meat is in the shops outside of the temples of the idol worshipers. That's the only place where animals are being slaughtered. But you just eat it. And if somebody says, oh my gosh, I'm going to stumble because that's sacrificed to idols, they'll spit it out of your mouth, because it's better for you to sacrifice eating meat than it is for your weaker brethren to be lost in
Yeah.
their doubt. And so basically, when I look at Halloween and the question comes up is, as a Christian, what should I do? How should I understand
that was my next
this?
question. Yeah. What should we actually think about this then?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, God looks on the heart. Motives are always the main thing. Do you seek to honor God in your life? If you seek to honor God in your life, then you can go to a friend's costume party. I don't think that's a sin. I wouldn't let my kids dress up in anything that extols demons or witchcraft. I wouldn't let them dress up like a pregnant nun or a drug addict.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't even possibly let them dress up like the president of the United States, because that's a person made in God's image, and we don't just sit there and mock people. So what's the motive? Is it to let them have fun? If they're going to be a Power Ranger, if they're going to be Batman or Captain America, that's fine. If you want them to dress up as a Bible character, that's fine too. We shouldn't glorify that which we should take seriously. And demonic worship, people who are caught, under Satan's spell, that is a serious issue.
Mm-hmm.
But can it be redeemed? Can we? Well, really, is your Power Ranger 4-year-old really worshiping the devil? I think knowledge has to be balanced by love. I think experience needs to be balanced, with caution. And your freedom has to be balanced with responsibility. But ultimately, you can be an example to others. Heck, if you're concerned about Halloween and the occult, isn't this a wonderful reminder to say, on October 31st, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to be praying for people who are trapped in the occult. I'm going to be praying for people who are, who've been playing with Ouija boards, because those are real doorway items that can lead to people being enslaved. So we conform ourselves to Christ's image. We glorify God. But if we want to enjoy ourselves at a hot costume party or something like that, I don't see that as necessarily deviating from Christianity in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Good. And let the kids have fun collecting candy.
Matter of fact, what we do, we use it as an outreach. So my neighborhood is like part of, I don't know who sends these messages out, but kids come from all over to my neighborhood. We gave out over 700 candy bars last year.
Whoa.
700. And so what we do at my church is we ask the church body, bring in your full-size candy bars. We don't want the little guys. We want the big full-size candy bars. We put a scripture sticker on each candy bar, and we have a little postcard that will invite the parents to church. And we sit in our front lawn, we sing worship songs, but we hand out candy and we don't preach it to anybody. God bless you. Here you go. We've had so many parents who say, thank you so much for this. Right?
Yeah.
They're just happy that their kids are getting something that's a little bit positive and a little bit joyful. And we use it as an outreach opportunity. That's how we approach it. So it's a good time. The whole neighborhood here goes crazy. But yeah.
So your neighborhood sounds like it's got the reputation you guys put out?
I think so.
Do people put out?
Everybody. I mean, I have a neighbor who will project. It's the Great Pumpkin. Oh no, he projects Nightmare Before Elm Street on his garage door.
Yeah.
And so all the neighbors are sitting out front with little bonfires and things like that, hot cocoa, and everybody's having just a great time. The whole neighborhood gets decorated.
Hot cocoa in Southern California, that doesn't fit for me, being a Chicago, and it's hot cocoa on Christmas is good. SoCal, it's feels like a summer day to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be, it might be in the low 50s, okay, by the time the sun goes down.
Yeah.
Yeah, people say we don't have seasons in Southern California. That's not true. We have 4. We have the fire season, we have the mudslide season, we have the smoggy season, and we have the earthquake season. So that's 4.
I mean, this is me, even though I went to school at Biola, I mean, I don't remember exactly when earthquakes, is there a confined time? No, it's just anytime.
No, not usually. They tend to happen a little bit more in the spring than any time. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because everything's warming up, but not specifically.
That's right. Well, and I do remember the rainy season, when there would be rain.
As such, yeah.
Yeah. as sparse as it was. Yeah. Good. Well, Lenny, I really appreciate you enlightening us, the audience. Commenter on YouTube, Luke, says this is excellent. So I think he's edified from this. And I've dropped a link to that 4-part series that you did at your website. So for those that want to learn more, they can go check out your site, but also listen to that podcast series on the subject. So thanks for your time and effort into researching in this. I know, there's so much online on social media. It's kind of like, how do we make way through all of the data and information on the web? And
absolutely. Well, next, we'll have to talk about Christmas, because there's a whole lot of misconceptions about Christmas as well.
Yes, I'm a little more familiar with that and Saturnalia and the claims about that. So I've done a little bit more homework on that subject. But yes, and people in my own family, they think that Christmas is just based on we commemorate Jesus's birth, but there's no historical warrant for it being on December 25th. And
not historical warrant, but there is theological warrant.
Okay, I'm of the position that there is historical warrant. So I'm actually, okay. I don't know.
It depends on how you define historical warrant, but yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but nevertheless, yeah. So, and the point, getting back to Halloween here, the point is that even though we might see that Pope Gregory moved the day, it was a day that was set apart to honor the saints, to honor the souls. And so,
first it was to honor the martyrs. It was, and that had been part and parcel of Christianity since its inception.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, we have to remember the martyrs, those who went before us. Martyrs were, by definition, once Roman Catholicism starts to evolve its theology,
right?
Martyrs were immediate saints,
yep.
Right? They didn't have to spend their time in purgatory. So it became All Saints' Day in that aspect. Now any of the other saints who were duly recognized by the Roman Catholic Church as saints, then they were included in that panoply. And then All Souls Day was put right next to it on November 2nd, again, so that the saints could help pray for the other souls to pull them up into glory, so to speak. So
right.
And see, this is a time of Dante and Milton, and you see all of these threads still coming in through all this stuff.
That's right.
So.
Yeah, and it certainly helps us to understand. So this is why it's important to also understand theology, because when we understand theology and the differences between the denominations and the theological frameworks, that helps us to better understand history, why things happen the way they are, and thus leading to our present day, why they are the way they are today. And so that's why it's important to study theology and history so we can make sense of where we are in the world, in the timeline. We make sense of our time. So, Lenny, thanks so much for clarifying this complex issue for us.
Glad to do it. A lot of fun.
Good. Well, if folks have more, if they want to send questions your way, they can go to your website, which is comereason.org. So you can learn more about Lenny. He's an author. He's written books, chapters in collections of essays. You've even been published in the LA Times, and you're an apologetics speaker on conferences, churches, etc. So they can invite you to come speak.
And any social media channel. Basically, any social media channels, whatever it is, /Come Reason, you should be able to find me.
Okay, very good. Thanks so much, Lenny. God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you next month at ETS.
You know it. We'll have some good times. All right.
Great.
Thanks.
Well, that does it for the show today. I'm grateful for the continued support of our patrons. Those are folks that just chip in a few bucks each month to sustain and support the ministry efforts here at Veracity Hill. If you want to learn how to become a patron, you can go to veracityhill.com/donate. I'm grateful for the partnerships that we have with our sponsors, Defenders Media, Apologetics 315, and Rethinking Hell. I want to thank Gabe, our technical producer, for his fine work, Mark, our media associate, who will be joining us on the program next week as we discuss the Electoral College. It'll be a special Election Day episode, with next week being Election Day here in the United States, and I'll be talking about the Electoral College, explaining it, and I'll even give a defense for why I think it is a good tool in our political system. Regardless, we're not going to get into partisan politics. We're just going to be talking political theory, which is the way I've approached political issues at Veracity Hill. And I want to thank our guest today, Lenny Esposito, for enlightening us on the historical roots of Halloween. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank you for listening in and for watching in as we strive for truth on the historical Halloween.
This has been Veracity Hill, a viewer and listener supported program. For more resources, including past shows, visit veracityhill.com.